Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. While the coronavirus crisis evidently overshadows all other world events, the Islamic Republic of Iran seems bent on challenging the West vis-à-vis its nuclear program. Earlier this month, the International Atomic Energy Agency published a sharp rebuke of the clerical regime in Tehran over its persisting efforts to evade its responsibilities under its obligations as a signatory of the Non-proliferation Treaty. To analyze the latest pertaining to the Ayatollah regime's defined approach, I'm joined here in the studio by Mr. Meir Javedanfar, who is an Iran lecturer at IDC Herzliya. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, as well as Dr. Eran Lerman, who is the vice president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and a lecturer at Shalem College. Welcome. And I'd like also to welcome Dr. Fadi Essmaeel, who is a research fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at IDC Herzliya. Hi. Mr. Oren, give us a broader understanding on the latest developments pertaining to this situation.
Well, we have discussed over the last several years the so-called nuclear deal between 6 world parties plus the European Union and Iran, which is now almost null and void. But this time around, we are talking about an earlier covenant, the Non-proliferation Treaty, which the world is celebrating this month, its 50th anniversary. And Iran has chosen this occasion, even though it has signed and ratified the NPT under the Shah, of course, decades ago. It has chosen to try and hide several of its activities, which is contrary to the transparency clauses of the treaty. And this made the new Director General of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, publish this rebuke which you referred to, and also made Secretary of State Mike Pompeo issue a stern warning to Iran to refrain from that. Now, a few days later, Pompeo met, or at least coordinated, with 4 of his colleagues, the foreign ministers of the other permanent members of the Security Council, another proclamation regarding the NPT anniversary. But he has failed to get from the other 4, and apparently from the Russian and Chinese foreign ministers rather than from the French and the British, any mention of Iran by name in this document. So while we see that the IAEA and the United States are strongly against the Iranian behavior in this regard, they cannot get the Russians and the Chinese to join them.
Mr. Javedanfar, I'd like to hear your position on this situation, but first I'd like to bring a little bit of the domestic issues in the Islamic Republic. Right now, Iranians are suffering very badly from the coronavirus. The spread is considered to be, according to the public information, quite in the top 3 worst countries to deal with this epidemic at this stage, with expected thousands of casualties to follow because of the regime's inability to confront and the lack of tools necessary in order to deal with the situation. But at the same time, while Iranian Foreign Minister Muhammad Javad Zarif called on the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres to convince the Americans to alleviate the sanctions in order to gain the tools necessary in order to deal with this epidemic, the regime is defiantly continuing, both on the nuclear side, where it rejected the permission of IAEA inspectors to inspect sites in question of past activities related to the nuclear program, and at the same time, it is also dealing with ongoing operations in Syria and Yemen and Iraq and elsewhere, supporting the Hashd al-Sha'bi, the Kataib Hezbollah and so on in Iraq, the militias in Lebanon, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the militias in Syria, and the Houthis in Yemen. why won't it scale back in order to treat the Iranian people?
Actually, just to drive your point home, on the day that Zarif sent that letter to the IMF, Hashto Sha'abi Qatar Hezbollah attacked the Al-Taji base in Iraq, killing 3 Americans and injuring two Americans and a Brit.
British.
2 American, 1 Brits, 18 Katyusha rockets, and ultimately it happened on the day of what would have been the birthday of the slain General Qasem Soleimani.
Look, the Iranian regime thinks it can get away with it, to be honest with you. For now, they think they can get away with it. We've seen that the way they have managed so far with the coronavirus, they have not exactly shown a high respect for the lives of Iranian people. We saw that, for example, when it turned out that the city of Qom was the epicenter of corona, they didn't impose a quarantine. Every day, tens of thousands of people are going in and out of Qom, and they could be carrying, and some are carrying the coronavirus. Not only that, the Iranian regime is sending fighters to Syria, some of whom have corona. We know that because some of them returned, Pakistani Shia returned from Syria to Pakistan, and they were caught they had coronavirus. Look, this is a regime that thinks it can get away with it. In the modern history of Iran, there's been no regime that has caused so much misery upon the lives of Iranian people. We cannot, but what is happening in Iran regarding corona, this is an extraordinary situation. I think President Trump should not leave the people of Iran at the mercy of the regime at this point, because many will die. I think some of the sanctions pertaining to payments should be removed temporarily, just so to help the Iranians buy medicine to help with the corona victims.
Also, if they know that this money will go into weapons, will go into more terror fueled
we're going to get money
against
out of
the
them.
Americans.
We want money away from Iran. The sanctions would only allow money to come out of Iran, to make it easier for money to come out of Iran to buy medicine. That's it, because some of the secondary sanctions are making it difficult to buy the medicines. But look, this is what the West can do. But at the end of this situation, from what you see, you quote public numbers regarding coronavirus. Your viewers should know that the military intelligence of the IRGC, which is the strongest, is controlling the file on the number of victims in Iran.
Of course.
If you say anything on the social media, in the news, anything, they'll come after you, because the number of victims is 5 times, 6 times, probably more than the regime is declaring. And I think this is an extraordinary situation. No one likes the Iranian regime. But I think some secondary sanctions being relaxed now to enable money to come out of Iran to buy medicine won't change the situation that much.
Indeed, Dr. Lerman?
Well, the point, as you said, is that the Iranian regime is acting actually by doubling down on its gamble that the Americans will back down. The attack in Taji was followed by another. Our colleague at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, Dr. Yossi Mansharov, who's an Iranian expert, predicted that after a period of rethinking what happened to them after the assassination of Soleimani, the Iranians will return to the pattern of pinpricks against the Americans and other targets through terrorism, while the Iranian decision is to stage by stage remove all restrictions that they have accepted under JCPOA. And this is the real issue. The real issue is that they're doing 3 things at the same time. They're dangling the possibility of negotiations on their terms, remove the sanctions and we'll talk. They are also, and we all know that once the sanctions are removed, the talks will go on forever and nothing will ever be agreed beyond what they have already conceded. The second thing is terrorism and military pressure. And the third element is the acceleration, which is now breaking, by now it has come to the point in which it is breaking the NPT limits, which means that down the road, either the internal crisis in Iran will escalate to the point that the regime will have no choice but to back down and come back under the JCPOA limitations, which even the Europeans, not the Russians and the Chinese, the Russians and the Chinese will do anything at this point to humiliate the Americans. That's not the issue. But even the Europeans, who were for a very long time critical of the Trump strategy, are saying that Iran is in breach of its commitments, and they are basically breaching the NPT. This is a military program. The size of it, you don't even need to look at the archive that the Mossad brought to know that this is a military program. It is simply the size of a military program. And everybody who knows anything about military nuclear programs knows the difference between research on one hand of the scale, small, and large-scale production of low-level LEU for power stations.
Mm-hmm.
But the middle size is by necessity, by definition, a military program. Iran is on its way to the bomb, and it will have to be stopped one way or the other. And Israel should take that into consideration. It's difficult to focus our minds on anything but the coronavirus right now, but we should remain focused. And you see this in the way the IDF is preparing itself. Lieutenant General Aviv Kochavi, IDF Chief of Staff, has put forward a program for the reorganization of the military, which is called a multi-year program. It has an impressive name like all the previous multi-year programs before it. One of its most significant elements is the creation of a dedicated strategic branch of the IDF High Command with Iran as its focal point.
Including a designated general who deals with all Iran-related issues.
It will be the Iran general.
Dr. Essmaeel?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the U.S. standpoint of view, the talk about the sanctions reminds me of different days when Saddam Hussein was under sanctions, and I recall the letters and the pressure that we received from all over the world. How can you let the children of Iraq suffer? And they suffered in the thousands, tens of thousands, and diabetic patients who don't have insulin. And we just happen to know that all of those medications and all the insulin and all the baby formulas, all that, were rotting away in some dock in Marseille or some other place, and Saddam simply will not let him in. To him, the suffering of the people was a tool of propaganda. And I don't put it past the Iranian regime, the current Mullah regime, to do exactly the same thing. If they discover that as a point of weakness, and it's so hard to me to say the next words, because at heart, I'm a physician. I want these people to have every possible treatment that we can think of. But honestly, I'm not sure. Even if they buy the stuff, I'm not even sure that it will make it to the people. And so the question, what do we do? Do we actually just make drops there, like aerial drops? Not a bad idea. Just bypass the whole corrupt structure of STAD and the IRGC and all this elite, Tehran elite that is hoarding everything for itself. Do we just bypass that and drop stuff, equipment?
Masks.
Masks. Even sometimes, some cases, the most basic things that don't cost anything, and we can drop them in the billions if you wanted, just to make them, maybe. In the end of the day, these are, because there is really still no medication, there might be, and we still don't have a viable vaccine. So the stuff that we can use is just protective gear. And, maybe that's what we need to do. Take entire, bunches of crates, yes, crates of masks, some Purells, I don't know what, just bomb around with that. Maybe that's the bombing we should do. And together with some other material for the Iranian people, I really don't trust the Mullah regime. I just don't. I know you don't. None of us does. To really not use that as their card. Because if they discover, as Saddam did, that this is a soft spot in the West, and they will find a few really well-meaning reporters, with all the respect to all reporters in the world, and to start fanning those flames of compassion, which we all feel, that can go in a very bad way in the end. Indeed. And in many ways, you can buy something when you're pretending to buy something else. So I'm just saying, I'm not coming against the idea, but maybe we should do it in a different way.
Mr. Oren, I'd like to bring us back now to the fact that Iran is using the global crisis of the coronavirus in order to, under the shadow of the attention of the international community, trying to exploit it for the regime's policies and aggressive attitudes, also in the region, but also vis-à-vis its nuclear program. to what degree do you think that the United States and Europe and even China and Russia, which do not want Iran to attain nuclear weapon capabilities, are tentative to those measures undertaken by Iran? Also, the statements made by IAEA Secretary General Grossi, who was quite clear that this time something needs to be done about this unless Iran changes its attitude.
Well, just following on what Dr. Essmaeel said, next month we are going to mark the 40th anniversary of Operation Eagle Claw, more popularly known as Desert One, which was the site where the American effort to release the hostages, the diplomats taken hostage in the embassy, failed. And an American president may not possibly try another operation unless this is Donald Trump, who is unpredictable, even if it's a humanitarian, as you say, bombing operation, throwing medicine at the Iranian people, which will have its propaganda value. Now, back to the regime. It's diabolical, but not that sophisticated. And one sign is that it has not managed to protect itself from the virus. We have seen several casualties, including fatalities, in the immediate circle of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. And had they been so advanced in their thinking, it wouldn't have happened, because this may throw out of joint the entire structure of the regime. If it gets to Khamenei himself or the leadership of the IRGC, it may have an impact. Now, the new commanding general of the Revolutionary Guards has another direction, different from Soleimani. And we saw that he has made several statements regarding Afghanistan.
Because of his expertise.
Because of his expertise, which we should applaud here in Israel. Let him direct his energy elsewhere. Why should they go back to Syria if he thinks, especially now that the Americans are talking with the Taliban, that this is a better place for Iran, especially since Afghanistan is a neighbor of Iran's and a very important front if there is an upheaval there. Now, as for the NPT, it is a very unfortunate timing for the other world powers, because each time in 5-year intervals, when the review conference convenes, the haves, the Americans, the Russians, the French, the British, have to convince the have-nots that they are now progressing towards zero nuclear power. And they're on the defensive. Iran may have managed to find the right time for it to challenge the nuclear powers, and they would not be able to respond right now until the conference is over.
Mr. Javedanfar?
The Iranians, for now, the Iranian priority is to make sure Trump loses. How do you make sure that Trump loses? When he goes to campaign, you don't want to give him propaganda victory to say, I am the one who brought the Iranians to the negotiation table, or I'm the one who forced them to reduce the stockpile. How do you make sure that doesn't happen? You do the opposite. You don't talk to the Americans, and you push up the amount of enriched uranium that you have.
So you're saying that all the actions right now the Iranians are undertaken are in order to blackmail the American people in trying to extort, basically, the American presidency from Trump in order to find an alternative that will be more lenient towards the regime?
Look, from the Iranian regime point of view, Trump broke the deal. And the Mossad papers that came out of Tehran showed that Iran wasn't breaking the deal after it signed it. So the way they see Trump wronged them, so of course they want him out. And then look everything that... But the Iranian regime we have to think about the changes that has happened under Trump. On the one hand, Trump broke the deal, okay? But on the other hand, the Iranian regime, because of the coronavirus, the way it has mismanaged that, and because of the Ukrainian plane that was shot down and the regime lied, I think, whereas before many people in Iran saw uranium enrichment as their right and there was some identification, in my opinion, this regime now saying that this is a national nuclear program, it's nothing but a joke to many Iranians, to be honest with you. And I think because of the regime, the legitimacy that it has suffered, even if there's a Democrat president in place, the regime is going to have a very hard time to justify the nuclear program, whose cost we don't know, while many people in Iran are suffering from poverty and other social ailments.
Nevertheless, the fact that the nuclear-related archive was found is an indication that the JCPOA was broken in the first place, because Iran was supposed to deliver all nuclear-related materials that pertain to its weapon dimensional aspirations.
Let me be precise. The
Please.
JCPOA, because of a political decision by the Obama administration not to belabor the question of the
Correct.
previously suspected nuclear activity, what the archive proved was not that the Iranians were breaking the JCPOA. It proved unequivocally that the JCPOA was based on one big lie, because right up front, on the first page of the JCPOA text, because that's not an agreement, nobody
Indeed.
signed it, because otherwise they would have needed a Senate ratification, which Obama couldn't get. But it is not a signed document. But the document as it is states that Iran does not have a military nuclear program, whereas everybody knew already then that this was a lie when it was agreed it was a lie.
But Dr. Lerman, this is part of the issue which many people have a problem with. That they said that past issues we don't ask, don't tell, which was basically that was the agreement. So this was put under the past issues. Who I don't know. I think the Americans, the reason they did that is because they knew that the Iranians had a nuclear weapon program, and the Iranians also knew it. But if you bring that out now, then there would have been no deal. That was a.
So in other words,
would life would have been better without a deal?
This broke Obama. Yes, this broke Obama's pledge to us and to the American people and to the world that a bad deal is worse than no deal. He said this again and again and again. And then he cut a bad deal on the argument that this is better than no deal.
So in other words, President Obama lied to the international community and to the American people about the knowledge behind the deal that founded everything on one big lie.
I'm not quick with the word lie, but he definitely allowed the Iranians to mislead the world on the question of the previous military activities.
Dr. Essmaeel, how do you perceive this?
Well, lying, and I'll say I will use the word, is a tool in international policy. I don't think a government ever tell the truth in any situation about anything. That will be a moment for us to have another meeting about a moment the government tells the truth, any one of them, about any subject.
You know what they said on the epitaph? Here lies a politician, as usual.
Go ahead.
I love that. I'm going to use it. So yeah, of course, the president at the time, President Obama, he had an opportunity. He really perceived it. I want to be a little nicer to him. I didn't vote for him, by the way, but I think he really believed that once we relieve the pressure of that regime, then a lot of their paranoia will go away, and they will be more open. I mean, he really believed in that. I mean, I've heard people saying that in Kerry's staff saying, well, we just have to lift, they're just behaving like this because we are pushing them so hard, so it's just reacting. Give them some space and they will start being much more useful.
Which clearly didn't work out.
Did exactly the opposite, because this is a lesson we have learned since the days of this. You would think that people would have learned from the days of communism and previous regimes in the early parts of the 20th century. You cannot rely on what these kinds of regimes say or do, because because you just can't. They operate only on one instinct, which is survival. And if they have a project such as exporting the number one rule in the revolution is they want to spread divine justice in the world. That's the number one sentence.
It'd be nice if it reaches Iran first, but never mind.
Yeah, where there is. So these kinds of regimes, they're not built for that.
In an unexpected form.
they will expand and do things as much as they have opportunity to. So the trick is don't give them the opportunity. And you don't necessarily have to be aggressive or violent with them, but you have to mean business. And I think that the mullahs now know that the U.S. means business. Now, I'm not really sure that Uncle Joe will be much more lenient on the Iranians. I think, there were whispers in Washington, D.C., that whatever Mr. Obama was doing was not always completely.
But he said he'd go back to the deal. He said he'd go back to the Iran.
Okay, lies, politicians,
Fair
we're going back there. So I'm not sure. We know what Mr. Biden thinks and does, but who knows?
Well, we're drawing near to the end of the program, so I'd like to give each and every one of you the opportunity to have a closing assessment for the near future. Mr. Oren, we'll start with you.
The coronavirus crisis changes everything, or almost everything. We have yet to see whether it will have an impact on the behavior of the Iranian regime, whether out of some reassessment or as a pretext. If they are looking for a pretext to change their policy, this is a good one.
Mr. Javedanfar?
I think the coronavirus is a disaster that it could lead to the death of tens of thousands of Iranian people. And I think the regime's handling of it has delegitimized it, that such a regime doesn't deserve to rule Iran.
Dr. Lerman?
Given what is at stake, we should keep up our hopes that change will come to Iran, that the Iranian people deserve. However, we cannot count on it. We have to be ready for the possibility that the Iranian nuclear project will have to be foiled by force.
The United States government has to maintain very heavy pressure on the military intelligence arms of the regime and do everything it can to open inroads into the periphery, into the people. As I said, send in material, anything, help, information, as much as we can, and we can find many ways to do this.
One line. The Israeli people have helped the Iranian people during earthquakes. Regardless of the regime, they will help the Iranians in this crisis too, if possible.
If the regime lets us.
Of course.
Indeed, indeed. Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Mr. Javedanfar, Mr. Oren, Dr. Lerman, and Dr. Essmaeel for being here with us today. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.